Anyway, thank you very much. I'm Valerie Johnson, this is Professor Elizabeth Shepherd, and we are here to speak about a collaborative partnership we've been undertaking around collaborative PhD doctoral awards, AHRC funded in both cases. So it's very fitting, that, as other people have said, that we're both here to speak collaboratively. So when a few years ago research councils and universities thought of collaborative doctoral awards, what they tended to think of was this kind of thing. Oil companies, this like ICI, Unilever, it was kind of industrial, heavy industry, mining, that kind of thing. But more recently, archives have started to apply for these doctoral awards and have been successful in doing so. The aim of the presentation, Elizabeth, and my presentation this afternoon is to sort of explore the relationship we've had around the PhD studentships that we've been awarded, and to aim to give you a bit of an understanding of some of the fantastic opportunities and challenges associated with that scheme. So between us, we're going to cover three perspectives. I'm going to start, and I'm going to speak about the scheme from the point of view of the archival practitioner, because I work at National Archives, and then I'm going to pass over to Elizabeth to talk about the scheme from the point of view of the archival academic, and also from the studentship perspective. So first of all, what does collaboration mean? When you actually apply, obviously it tends to be around the project, so the application form very much centres around the project, how you're going to work together, but it's about more than that, and a couple of people, Sharon included, have mentioned that this morning, and it's become apparent from a lot of the presentations that one of the key things that makes the project work is strong collaboration, particularly between individuals. So it is a collaboration around the project, but it's also around the archive staff, the university staff, and obviously the student, and also between the organisations, but particularly, as other people have said this morning, around the individual relationships that the archive and the university staff develop. So I've split my section of the presentation into three W's. So I'm going to look at ways of working and practical challenges, what worked less well and what worked more successfully. So what the practical challenges were, and there were some practical challenges. First of all, you have to have an agreement between the university and the archive. And the way that had been set up in the past, because as I mentioned at the beginning, the sort of history of these tends to be much more industrial. The agreements tend to mention things like an industrial supervisor. There's a lot of talk of inventions, about what happens with those, and that kind of thing. So that it was completely skewed towards these things. So we did have to do an awful lot of editing between two of us to make it work. And one area in which that was particularly important was around IP, because the original agreement gave the IP to the university and the student, and we didn't want to steal the thesis, but particularly it's been mentioned here about people doing cataloguing and research guides as part of these, and it would have meant that we couldn't use the research guides and catalogues without getting the permission of the student every time wanted to use it, and obviously that's completely impractical. So you need to make sure that you've kind of covered the interest, and it's not about stealing the IP of the thesis. It's about making sure the practicalities of the agreement work for you. Finances was another one. Neither Elizabeth nor I are finance specialists. And we had occasion where the student would come and say, I'm not sure I've been paid yet, and we weren't sure if TNA bit hadn't been paid, or the university hadn't been paid, or TNA had sent it to the wrong department. So because neither of us were involved with the finance department, there was a lot of toing and froing, trying to find contacts, trying to find if the invoice had been sent to the right place. So that kind of thing also needs sorting out. This has also been mentioned today. There are different patterns of working, different rhythms, if you like. Universities obviously work to terms, and they work to a different year, whereas archives do either financial year or calendar year. Obviously the university year is October to June, so there are different rhythms about when things need to be done, when people are there, and you need to factor that in as well. There are also different perceptions of time. So obviously with the studentship, if you're an archive, it may be that you want a particular piece of work, like a catalogue completed on a short-term basis, or you may have a business priority that you need to meet. Whereas for a university, that project is a 4+ year project, and it may be that their attitude towards what's going to be delivered in what time is very different from yours. As far as different perspectives are concerned, there may be different perspectives here, and it may be that the academic has more in terms of conceptual delivery rather than a material delivery. And again, if you're looking for a catalogue as in a contrast to something else more conceptual, like a thesis on a particular piece of archival theory, again, it's worth sorting it out first. There also may be different expectations from the student and the staff. So for the student who has the studentship, they will come in and their only focus is on that particular project, whereas obviously if you're working in a large archive, people have other pressures on time, and for them the studentship may be of no interest whatsoever. So it's managing the expectations of both is a very important thing to do. But I've put challenges there, and that's not a euphemism for problems, as it's often used today. Because what I thought when I wrote the slide was that even though some of these things, particularly some of the ones at the top, which are very practical, some of the ones closer to the bottom, it's important that your ways of working are challenged. It's an opportunity to look at how you work. Do you need to do it in the way that you're doing it? You know, why do you use the rhythm of working that you do? And it's a really good opportunity just to unsettle yourself a little bit in your work. And that's part of the benefits of the PhD process. So some of the things that I think we, as in TNA, needed to learn from the experience. I was aware that with both the studentships we had with UCL, there were, in one case, multiple changes of supervisor, which I felt was very tough on the student. It wasn't deliberate. We had a redundancy and a restructuring programme, and people move. In one case, we had somebody leave for ill health. So it's not as if we did it deliberately, but I was aware that having, particularly, as I say, with one student shopping and changing from one person to the next is really unsettling. And I'm sure Elizabeth would replicate that, but that was a real issue, and that I would try and avoid that if possible in the future. Supervisory choice is a really difficult one as well. In both the cases, I've been the supervisor, I'm head of research, and I think people thought, oh, that's head of research, she can do the supervision, which I've really enjoyed and benefited from. But actually, with hindsight, I think it might have been more useful, and Elizabeth and I were talking about this over lunch, to have someone who was perhaps embedded more in the particular project rather than me sitting with an oversight. And I think that's a moot point. I think Elizabeth didn't feel that was so important, but so that's an interesting one. It's something you might want to think about anyway. And that's also related to the next point, which is about embeddedness in the organisation, to make sure the person really is aware of how they can fit in. I think TNA, when it started, hadn't done these before. We were very nervous, and I'm sure Elizabeth was too, about using the student as a kind of extra employee, because that's not what the idea of the scheme is. So we were quite light touch and quite hands-off in the way we treated the students. We wanted them to be able to get on with the research and not to say, here's a pile of cataloguing, you've got 3 years to do it. So we tried to back off a little bit, and I suspect in one of the cases that we might have been a little bit too hands-off. There's also the change over time. Obviously, as I said, the studentship is 4 to 5 years long. In both cases, I went a little bit longer for various reasons. And both the project changes, but also the organisation changes, its business priorities, and so on. And that can leave a studentship slightly isolated. And particularly if, to go to the next bullet point, it's a specific project. So if the priority of your organisation lies in one area and you have a studentship, if it's moved on, it can be left slightly high and dry, which can be a problem for the student. What worked well was, again, something that's been talked about this afternoon, the session previous to this one, is that both Elizabeth and I and the students all came from the same discipline. So we were all coming from a professional archive society, and we could really hit the ground running once the project started, and that was really important. We were using the same language, we knew what the concepts were. Both students had already worked in archives for a number of years, so they had a lot of experience, and that was really successful. It was a great experience. The networking has been really important to me, speaking selfishly. I think it's been great for us to develop a really strong relationship with UCL, and that's had all sorts of direct and indirect benefits, so that's been really important, both for the organisation and, as I say, for me. One of those benefits has been access to new literature and thinking, and however much we try, it's very difficult once you're in a practitioner role however much you think I am going to read all those archival science issues that are piling up on my desk. It is very difficult to do that. And if you've got access to, the students doing the literature review, you're sitting in supervisions with Elizabeth and her colleagues are saying, this new thought is coming out. This is a new way of thinking about this. Is that the concepts around appraisal are changing, and it's very good to keep kind of updating your knowledge with what's really at the cutting edge of the profession. And I think that's been very important. Having an external perspective has been really important too. If you have a student, they can come into the organisation, they do have an outside perspective and they can look at things, particularly if people have been there a long time. As I mentioned about, unsettling yourself. Someone coming in and saying, why are you doing it in this way? Why couldn't we do this? It's having new ideas. It's somebody with permission, if you like, to challenge what the organisation is doing without any sort of, any comeback for them. And I think that's been really important. And I know the Welcome, who've had the other studentship with UCL, have also said, and the supervisor used the word revelatory, about having that external perspective on parts of the work they were doing. It's also a luxury of having someone focus on one project. Somebody mentioned in the previous question session about cataloguing and how difficult it is to do all this extra thing on top of the basic job. And it's really great if you've got someone who has that luxury to focus on one project and think about it in depth for a long period of time and really develop the thinking and practice around that area. And that's a great thing, that it's a real luxury to have and a real benefit to the organisation. Having a specific project, I know I put it in the previous slide, I've also put it in this one because it can also be a real benefit. If the organisation's going up and down like a wave with all sorts of fashions coming in and out, change of chief executive, as Oliver announced this morning, you've got this kind of fixed point around a specific project that you're thinking, we are still focusing on cataloguing, whatever it happens to be. We've still got somebody working on that. It's not just flipping up and down according to fashion. So it's really important that the basic pieces of work and the basic thinking about some real archival tenets is still going on. And finally, the ability to explore. So that's really great. The Welcome supervisor called it having a controlled experiment. So you can really explore stuff. The students got the luxury of the time and the resources, the thinking to do that. And because it is slightly apart from your own work, it means they can try things out. If they don't work, that's fine. It doesn't affect the basic working of the department. So it's a real opportunity to test things out, and I think that's really good. So positives to take forward. I think it was Sean, outside the room at the moment, so I was talking about you, mentioned it this morning. Be involved early in the choice of project, make sure it's right for your organisation. Choose a supervisor to close to the project. This has come out early, so Elizabeth will disagree with this, but I think for me that's something that I felt we could have done a little bit more on. Embed the student in the department socially. Their work might be slightly different, but it's really important for them to be involved. Do set project objectives, but don't expect them to deliver business objectives. And that goes back to the fact that the business can shift and change, and it's unfair to load that on your student. The project needs to be successful, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're delivering on a business priority, and it's not a fair responsibility to give them. Be flexible. It's a learning experience. It's a learning experience for the student, so they may not be successful in what they do. There may be problems with the thesis, but it's also a learning experience for the organisation. If you haven't done that before and you're an archive, there will be learning, there'll be mistakes that you make as well. So the flexibility on all sides is really important if you're really going to reap the benefits of this. And be prepared to put the time in. It can be, if someone just dumps a thesis on your desk and says, "Oh, can you read this by next week?" and it's on 100,000 words and you haven't been expecting it, you've got to grit your teeth and that's the weekend gone. So that's fine. But it does take time. But if you put in the time, you will reap the rewards. My final slide before I pass to Elizabeth. One of the really important things for me has not been just about how can we squeeze benefits out of the student for the archive. It's also been about making a genuine contribution to supporting professional development and research for the archive profession, and that's been a really important driver for me, and I think that's a really important thing. And on that note, I'll pass over to Elizabeth.
So I'm going to reach the same endpoint as Valerie, and you'll recognise some of the structure, but the content varies a little bit. So Val has examined the first of the three perspectives on research collaboration in archives and information management, that of the practitioner, the archive professional. And I'm going to now consider the other two, or two of the other perspectives, archive academics in the university and doctoral students. In particular, the doctoral students have negotiated this boundary. And I think something that's different about our paper, perhaps from quite a lot of the papers that we've heard today, is that the research in this case is not for some other discipline. The research, the actual content of the research, is for us, for the archive and information management discipline. It's not about archivists supporting research in some other discipline, and I think that's a distinction we might like to make. I'm very grateful to my doctoral students, past and present. I'm allowed to name them: Jenny Bunn, Alexandra Evely and Anna Sexton, all of whom were or are on Collaborative Doctoral Award scholarships from the AHRC, and also to my colleagues and co-supervisors for their contributions and views. So as you know, we at UCL have held three CDA awards since 2007, two of them with National Archives and one in collaboration with the Wellcome Library. So we tried not to take on too much at once, and we have done them not more than one each year, but new ones have started before the others have finished. The good news is that in spite of some difficulties, everyone involved says that the positives far outweigh the negatives and that collaboration has been hugely beneficial. So first, some benefits of collaborative approaches to research compared perhaps with more traditional sort of singular monodisciplinary approaches. From the academic perspective, mine, I guess, and my colleagues, working with a professional partner in an applied discipline gives a touch of reality to the research. Even if the work cannot be applied immediately, and usually it isn't quite, at least it's grounded in a professional service context. It is all too easy for me, as a full-time academic, outside practice, to become detached from the profession, and collaborative research helps to reconnect me. Since it's Research Council funded activity, the university is also happy, whereas taking time out to do something purely practice-based would not be so favoured. Information studies departments in universities are very small, typically 15 academics or so, but generally only 2 or 3 in archives and records disciplines. Consequently, if we have to find 2 doctoral supervisors, which we do for our doctoral students, that's not always easy. It's always 2 out of the same 3. And it becomes possibly rather repetitive. So it's refreshing for us to be able to work with professionals as co-supervisors, not just advisors, not just practitioners somehow outside, but as co-supervisors in the academy. And that brings new ideas and perspectives into the research pool. With CDA's, Collaborative Doctoral Awards, the principal investigator, i.e. the academic, has to come up with the core idea for the research in order to make the bid, which means that we have some control over the topics which doctoral students study, instead of the traditional model of waiting for the student to pitch up with some brilliant idea which we then attempt to supervise. But it can give us, therefore, a mechanism for developing proactively particular research themes, and I think that's been quite important to us. As a result, for the student, the CDA provides a ready-made project and an existing collaborative relationship, both of which have already been proof tested, rather than having to initiate these from scratch as part of the research process. One of my students commented, "The CDA bid process lays out some minimum expectations in terms of support, which is useful at the start of the collaborative relationship." A very distinct advantage for the university is that having a scholarship and a project ready has enabled us to recruit uniformly excellent doctoral students who have all been mid-career archive professionals and who would probably not have come back to the academy otherwise. And I think they're making a real intellectual contribution. The main advantage mentioned by my students is access to resources, described by one student as the major benefit of my collaboration. Such things as the host's reputation help to establish contacts and relationships with other academics and with professionals, and providing access to sites of research and some fantastic personal contacts. One said, "It would have been quite difficult, for instance, to find any way to interview archive users without the existing collaboration agreement. Collaboration adds legitimacy to the research in the eyes of some archivists in practice, and it also acts as a symbol of the host archive's seriousness about research-based practice, so it adds lustre both ways. In practical terms, as well as the CDA requirements for things like office space, access to staff and so on, one student said that her host went well beyond what was laid out in the initial CDA proposal to pay for the digital archive to be hosted, paying contributor expenses for meetings in London, providing really nice bookable space for conducting workshops, access to a range of equipment, and also helping her organise and fund a symposium and launch for a digital archive. And she commented, "This cannot be underestimated. I wouldn't be able to move my research forward in the ways I've wanted to without the input of resource," and they wouldn't have got that lot from the university. Turning now to some disadvantages. From my perspective, the most difficult thing about collaborative research, whether drafting the proposal, managing the project, or ensuring successful completion, has been negotiating the very different institutional demands, which I think Val's alluded to already. Timescales in a university and in a service delivery organisation are totally different. The results of a doctorate are available in 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 years' time. A service organisation has monthly or quarterly targets to meet. That's just totally incompatible, so you might as well forget it. People change much more frequently in a large archive service than in a university, and successful supervision and research so much depends on the people involved building a good working relationship, and that can be hard if there are frequent changes, supervisory changes, which are basically beyond your control. Although all of our CDA bids succeeded, we have also tried to get major research grants working in collaboration, and we found a real obstacle in trying to specify outcomes which the host could count as a benefit and those which the university and the funder also valued. Do you want to be able to do something differently as a result this year, or is a journal article or an academic conference paper useful? One student explained it in this way. In the host organisation, she said, "My research isn't an internal priority. It is of interest, but it's not part of the team's core work stream, so I haven't found it easy. I have had to build enthusiasm for what I'm doing, rather than it being there as a given. I've ended up working fairly autonomously on the edge of an established team, which makes it difficult to feel integrated. It was hard work justifying my presence to some of the staff and to maintain a high enough profile." Another explained, "At times it has seemed like working for 2 masters, different planning periods, different work priorities." In one case, significant changes in the host's service priorities made the originally planned case study very difficult to follow through, and it could have caused the thesis jeopardy. I mean, we worked out what to do, but it could have been a major problem. However, we have now run 3 CDAs, 1 completed, 1 in the final year, 1 kind of halfway through. And I would say that they have been all been successful, in my terms at least. That is, they've undertaken some interesting research and produced some excellent academic theses by the students. I've had the privilege of supervising 3 outstanding doctoral students doing really innovative work. We've managed to find ways of working in partnership which respected different perspectives and outcomes for students, universities and the profession. We have been lucky that the collaborative relationships have been flexible and responsive to the nature of academic research, so we're grateful for that, I can tell you. The hosts have not imposed too many expectations or limitations, but have provided access and support. We did choose partners with whom we wanted to work, and we have invested a great deal of time in the partnerships and in making sure that the supervisory panels worked well. Having 3 active supervisors is both a blessing and a pain for the CDA students. So what we need to do now is to build a research culture across the profession much more widely, not in just 1 or 2 or a few archive services. How can we bridge the gap between academia and the profession in research-orientated ways? An academic colleague, formerly a doctoral student, has been active in such things as establishing the Cardigan Continuum Reading Group, and as a journal editor mentors new professionals to encourage them to write for the journal. But there's a great deal more to be done. So in conclusion, I think I get back to your slide here. We have benefited and learned from the collaborative projects in ways that would not have been possible if we'd simply worked alone. So it has definitely been an enriching experience for us. And we hope that our case study will provide other university and archive service partnerships with some inspiration for future research collaboration.